Once, the European bison, the wisent, ruled the forests of Europe. They were colossal and shaggy, taller than a man at the shoulder, yet silent as they moved through the trees. They were sculptors of their environment, wanderers of vast meadows, bearers of seeds, builders of soil. From the ancient woodlands of France to the jagged ranges of the Caucasus, these giants roamed with a quiet dignity, grazing and trampling, reshaping the world with each step. They were not just survivors of the Ice Age, they were essential. But the world around them began to shift. First came the fire. The forests cleared to make room for crops. Then the fences. Then the cities. By the Middle Ages, the bison had already been pushed into shrinking pockets of wilderness. Where once they walked across continents, they were now corralled into the forgotten corners of maps. Still, they clung on, just barely. As centuries passed, new dangers arrived. Not wolves or cold, but progress. The 18th century introduced the musket. The 19th gave way to the hunting rifle. Killing a bison, once a feat of coordination and reverence, became as easy as pulling a trigger. They were hunted for meat, for sport, for trophies to hang on manor walls. To kill a bison was not about survival, it was about status. And then came war. World War I devoured Europe in fire and steel, and the forests, always taken last, began to fall. In Poland, deep within the Białowieża forest, the last truly wild bison in Europe were caught in the crossfire. German troops, desperate, starving, opportunistic, hunted them down. By the time the war ended, only 9 remained. They too would vanish. By 1927, the unthinkable had happened. The European bison was extinct in the wild. Gone, erased from the landscapes they had shaped for thousands of years. Only 54 bison remained anywhere on Earth, all in captivity. And of those, just 12 individuals carried the genetic lifeline strong enough to rebuild a species. The line had grown terrifyingly thin, a thread, a breath, but it hadn't snapped. Somewhere in quiet zoo pens and hidden reserves, scientists made a decision. They would try to bring the bison back, not just as a symbol, not just as a curiosity, but as a living, breathing force of restoration. In the 1930s, the first organized breeding programs were born. Poland, Germany, Russia. Each animal's birth was recorded with care. Every bloodline was tracked, every pairing scrutinized to avoid the collapse of what little genetic diversity remained. This wasn't conservation. This was survival engineering. And yet, through war, borders, famine, and politics, the work continued, quietly, faithfully. In 1932, the International Society for the Protection of the European Bison was founded, a coalition of scientists, veterinarians, and visionaries who refused to let the giant vanish from memory. Over the following decades, something remarkable happened. The bison population began to grow. First dozens, then hundreds. By the 1960s and 70s, the animals were living in large enclosures, forest parks, and reserves. But a question lingered, whispered in research papers, echoed in quiet conference halls. Could they ever go back to the wild? Could these zoo-born animals bred in the shadows of captivity return to the ancient landscapes that once knew their kind? And if they did, what would happen to the land? Because by then, scientists had learned something new, or rather, something old they had forgotten. Bison weren't just part of the ecosystem, they were the keystone. Where they walked, forests opened. Where they grazed, meadows bloomed. Where they rolled in the dirt, new seeds found purchase. Without them, wildflowers vanished. Insects declined. Birdsong faded. Europe's wild places, so many of them, were not just empty. They were broken. And maybe, just maybe, bison could heal them. That's when a new idea emerged. Not reintroduction, rewilding, the idea that nature could restore itself if we gave it back its missing pieces. And the bison? They were the first piece. At first, the signs were small. A patch of grass nibbled down to the root. A shallow depression where a bison had rolled, churning up soil. A trail just faint enough to miss, winding between young saplings like a ghost road from another time. But those who watched closely could see it. The land was reacting. It began on the forest floor, places that had been choked with overgrowth. Thick, tangled shrubs that blocked sunlight and strangled out the underbrush were now clearing, not by axe, not by fire, but by hoof. Bison are not gentle walkers. When they move with presence. Their hooves press deep. Their weight breaks the crust of the earth, and everywhere they travel, they leave behind something strange and beautiful. Space. Space for seeds to land, for water to collect, for light to reach the soil. Soon, flowers that hadn't been recorded in the region in decades began sprouting. Species that botanists thought were extinct in those parts, wild thyme, alpine clover, field scabious, all emerged where the bison had grazed. Camera traps started picking up more than just bison. Birds returned, ground nesters like the Eurasian woodlark, which need open patches cleared by grazers. Bees and butterflies followed the blooms. Foxes and badgers began digging again, hunting rodents drawn to the new seed-rich grasses. Even wolves were spotted farther down the valley, their prints overlaying those of the bison. The web was knitting itself back together, thread by invisible thread, and all of it from 17 bison. But the changes weren't just biological, they were personal. The people, the same locals who had once voiced fears and skepticism, began to notice too. Some saw the flowers, some noticed more birds in their orchards, some found themselves hearing for the first time in their lives the low rumble of a bison moving through the trees. One shepherd said it felt like living inside a story his grandfather used to tell, about animals so large the forest made room for them when they walked. Some were still cautious, some stayed unconvinced, but the fear had softened. The whispers about danger had quieted, because something about seeing a bison calf beside its mother in the wild, not behind a fence, but standing free under the Romanian sun, changes you. In 2015 and 2016, new bison were introduced to strengthen the herd and broaden the gene pool. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about resilience. Each new animal arrived with veterinary checks, traveled in special crates, and was slowly introduced to the others. Over time, the herd expanded, moving beyond their initial release zone. They didn't rush. Bison never do. But their movement was steady. And that movement, even more than reproduction, was what thrilled scientists most. You see, if bison had only stayed in one place, the project would have failed. That would mean they were surviving, but not adapting. But the data told another story. GPS collars, the same ones that had malfunctioned early on, were now working properly, and the information they provided was astonishing. Bison were using ancient routes, paths that, when compared to historical land surveys and indigenous trail maps, matched the migratory patterns from centuries ago. They weren't just finding space, they were finding memory. One ecologist described it like this: "It's as if the forest remembered them, and they remembered the forest." And with every kilometer they traveled, they redrew the boundaries of the wild. By 2017, the herd had become truly independent. Calves born in the wild now outnumbered those introduced from captivity. Social structures had solidified. Dominant bulls guarded mating rights, while matriarchs led family groups. But more than that, the forest had changed. Soil samples taken in 2014 showed high compaction, low microbial activity, and poor nutrient circulation. But by 2018, the same sites showed improvements in soil health, carbon content, and biodiversity. Places that had once been considered ecological dead zones were now rebounding. That's when a team of researchers from Yale University arrived. They weren't just interested in biodiversity. They were studying carbon and whether wild grazers like bison could influence climate models. What they found stunned them. In just 48 square kilometers, a herd of 170 bison was helping sequester over 54,000 tons of CO2 annually. That's the equivalent of offsetting emissions from 43,000 cars. And they weren't even trying. There were no machines, no interventions, no carbon markets, just bison, walking, grazing, fertilizing, dispersing seeds, turning degraded land into living carbon sinks. In an age of climate crisis where entire industries are chasing complicated solutions to carbon emissions, here was an ancient natural machine already doing the work. No fuel, no wires, no oversight, just fur, hoof, and instinct. By 2022, the project reached a tipping point. For the first time, genetic studies of the Tarku herd showed something scientists had never dared to expect. The gene pool had stabilized. Despite beginning with only 12 viable bloodlines across all of Europe, the careful mixing of zoo-born bison with wild births had created a self-sustaining genetic population. This meant the bison of Romania didn't need constant help. They didn't need new introductions every year. They were finally, officially, wild. And with that, the question changed again. If this worked here, could it work elsewhere? Conservationists began expanding the project's scope. More agreements were signed, more land secured. By 2023, Rewilding Europe and WWF Romania had formally opened over 105,000 hectares of interconnected wilderness corridors, linking Tsarku, Domogled, and Retezat national parks. That corridor wasn't just for bison. It became a living highway for lynx, wolves, red deer, bears, and 100 other species that had been fragmented for decades by development and deforestation. In September 2023, a camera trap captured a lone bison grazing inside Domagled National Park. It was the first confirmed crossing between the herds, not human-assisted, not relocated, natural dispersal, proof that the wild was now expanding itself. Meanwhile, on the ground, things kept changing. Locals who once feared the bison were now offering tours. Rangers who once struggled to explain the project were now celebrated. Villages that once resisted the idea of rewilding were now proud to be part of it. Schools began teaching children about the wisent, not as a museum species, but as a neighbor. A nearby carpenter started making hand-carved bison ornaments for hikers. Even folklore began to shift. Stories that once spoke of bison as dangerous or cursed had changed into legends of protection, forest guardians who watched from the trees. And the bison? They remained silent, but their silence had become full. And still, they roam. The bison, once reduced to whispers in dusty journals and grainy black and white photos, now move through the forest like they never left. They don't know their own history. They don't know they were once declared extinct in the wild. They don't know that their very existence was rescued by clipboard and code, breeding charts, and conservation grants. They just walk, they graze, they nudge their calves along narrow trails, they bed down in meadows that haven't felt the weight of giants in centuries. And the forest listens. It listens the way an old violin might, a little cracked, but still full of song. Because the bison don't speak in words. They speak in movement, in rhythm, in presence, and the land answers back. In the most remote corners of the Tarku Mountains, change now moves faster than science can record it. Insects once thought gone are being rediscovered. Meadows once empty now glow with color in spring. Birds sing in dawn choruses loud enough to shake the fog. The rivers run clearer. The soil holds more water. Even the temperature in some areas has shifted ever so slightly as new vegetation takes hold and shades the earth again. And somewhere, out of sight of camera traps and research drones, a bison calf takes its first steps, wobbly, wide-eyed, unaware that the earth beneath its hooves has been waiting for it. The rewilding of the European bison in Romania didn't just rescue a species. It rewrote the rules. It showed what's possible when we stop trying to control nature and instead let it remember itself. When we trust the old rhythms, when we step back and listen. It proved that the wild, even when wounded, even when silenced, can find its way home, if we let it. And now the question is no longer, can we bring the bison back? The question is, what else is waiting? What other ghosts are out there, pacing the edge of memory? What species have we written off that might still be holding on? What landscapes, stripped, scraped, left to dry, might still bloom again, if given the chance? There are murmurs now, other countries watching closely, asking quietly, could we do the same? Could the bison return to the Pyrenees, the Dinaric Alps? Could lynx reclaim the Black Forest? Could rivers run wild again across the farmlands of the Netherlands? Could we, finally, stop building barriers and start building bridges? It's not just about nature, it's about something deeper, a reconnection, a remembering, because to bring back the bison is to bring back something in ourselves, the part that still hears the call of the forest, the part that looks at an empty hill and sees what it could be, the part that believes extinction is not the end of the story. Today, over 210 bison roam freely in the southern Carpathians, not behind fences, not as exhibits, but as wild creatures, part of a living, breathing web of life. They have no idea they're the largest free-roaming bison herd in Europe. They don't need to know, because their work is not measured in headlines or hashtags. It's measured in hoof prints, in seedlings, in the sound of a riverbank buzzing again with insects, in the silence broken by bird song. There's a phrase whispered sometimes by those who have walked among them, a quiet mantra passed between rangers and researchers, villages and visionaries. Ina poi da viu, back again, but alive. And maybe that's the real lesson, that healing is possible, that return is real, that we haven't lost everything, not yet. Somewhere, right now, a bison is lying in tall grass, eyes half closed, listening to the wind. Somewhere, a trail once overgrown is being trampled back into being. A seed carried in thick fur is dropped on fertile soil. A calf runs for the first time through open forest, startled by the shape of its own shadow. The wild is not gone, it's just waiting. So now we ask you, what do you think? Could the wild return where you live? What would it mean to bring back what we've lost, not in cages or books, but in living breath? Tell us in the comments below. We want to hear your voice, your vision, and if this story moved you, if it made you feel even a flicker of wonder, like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next story that rises from the silence. Because there are more, so many more. Until next time, stay wild, stay listening, and remember, sometimes the things we thought were gone forever are only waiting to be welcomed back.